Welcome to the Creative Penn podcast. I'm Joanna Penn, thriller author and creative entrepreneur, bringing you interviews, inspiration and information on writing, publishing options and marketing ideas for your book. You can find the episode show notes, your free author blueprint and lots more information at thecreativepenn.com, and that's Penn with a double N. And here's the show. Hello creatives, I'm Joanna Penn and this is episode 559 of the podcast, and it is Tuesday the 22nd of June 2021 as I record this. In today's show, I'm talking to Amit Gupta about Sudowrite.com, a writing tool built on top of GPT-3, a natural language generation engine. Now, I've talked about GPT-3 in a number of episodes now, so I'm not going to explain that. You can find them linked at thecreativepenn.com/future and a list of AI writing tools at thecreativepenn.com/AI writing. So I've had access to the GPT-3 beta for a while, but after initially playing with it and trying to figure it out, I found it wasn't useful enough to me, and it was just too hard. It wasn't fun particularly, it wasn't very useful. I could see some potential, but I just didn't have the ability to turn that into reality. So I stopped using it, and it was just quicker for me to do my own thing. But then when I read about Sudowrite in a New Yorker article at the end of April, I was like, I've got to get into that. Because what Sudowrite does is it's like a front end on GPT-3 with a lot more help and direction. And in this interview, Amit explains some of the functions, like the describe function, which I love, twists, character generation, the Wormhole text generator, and more. And this is truly the first tool, the sort of AI writing tool, and I've looked at lots of them. I've been playing with them for, 6-8 months now. And this is the first one I've thought, this is great. It makes it fun. Look, I'm even smiling as I think about it because I enjoy using it. And essentially, I'm using the describe function the most, and I do talk a bit about it in the interview, but essentially I'm writing a scene in a medical lab, as I was this week, and I can highlight medical lab and then click describe, and it will give me sensory detail, ideas for sensory detail, like sight, smell, sound, taste, touch, and metaphorical ideas. And then I can use that to kind of riff off for my own writing. To be clear, I am not copying and pasting text directly from Sudowrite, although that is possible. And we talk about that in the interview. I'm using it more like a writing prompt, or like I use a Thesaurus. You know, if I've got one word and I want to come up with other words, I'll go and use Thesaurus.com and figure out what other words. And so I'm using this more as a writing prompt, another brain. And I actually now, my writing process is that I open Scrivener, I open Thesaurus.com, and I open Pseudowrite.com. That's how I start. And I also do a lot of research as I write. So, for example, I'm writing, set in Canterbury Cathedral right now, and I'm always sort of Googling architectural detail and stuff like that. So I'm kind of creating my first draft from these different things, but it's my words using other people's as ideas. And that is completely normal part of the writing process, is riffing off ideas. None of us are born with all these ideas fully formed. We all take the input of our life and the research and all of this, and we turn it into our own work. So yeah, you can watch a demo video from Amits on YouTube. I'll link to it in the show notes, and you can also apply for access to Sudowrite.com, the beta. Mention that I sent you because, as Amit said in the interview, and it's in the recording, that you might get bumped up the queue if you say that I sent you. You get 3 days free trial to play around with it, so it's free to give it a go, and then you can sign up. And I think it's very reasonable amount per month to have it as a helpful writing tool. So the Alliance of Independent Authors posted an article today actually about practical and ethical guidelines around AI for authors. And I was kind of waiting for that article and also the video to post this interview, which I've been sitting on for a few weeks. So this AI article from Ally goes into the various aspects that impact writers and answers some common questions like, will AI make writers obsolete? Obviously not. And also, there's so much competition. Won't AI make it worse? Won't there be a tsunami of generated books? And so the article goes into that, and also how an author might use AI. In terms of ethical guidelines, which I contributed to, the statement is, an ethical author, for example, would say, I edit and curate the output of any tool I use to ensure the text is not discriminatory, libelous, an infringement of copyright, or otherwise illegal or illicit. I recognise that it is my job to ensure I am legally compliant, not the AI tool or service I use. I declare use of AI and other tools where appropriate. And Orna talks about her experience with Sudowrite after initial scepticism. And Orna writes poetry, literary, historical fiction and creative non-fiction. So it's certainly not a tool techno-optimists like me. And of course, you don't have to be technical to give it a go. As I said, go look at the demo. So I'm actually really thrilled because I feel like I've been talking about AI and writing and all these futurist things for ages, but I haven't actually been using them in a practical way. And now I feel like Sudowrite is the first tool I can practically use. Although, as I said, I'm being very careful not to copy and paste anything directly, but I will still run my manuscript through ProWriting Aid plagiarism checker just in case once I'm done. And of course, this is only the beginning. GPT-3, which Sudowrite is built on top of, is over a year old now, or almost a year old. So they might even be releasing GPT-4 sometime soon. But in recent weeks, the Beijing Academy of Artificial Intelligence released Wudao, a model 10 times the size of GPT-3. And Eleuther AI released an open source model similar to GPT-3, essentially a free model, open source and able to be used in a much more open way. And that will open up capabilities to many more applications. So as I said, this really is just the start. I'm so excited to see what comes next. And I feel that Sudowrite has made writing more fun. Because of the creative sparks that fly when you have something like another brain. Obviously, it's not a brain, but something like another brain next to you as you write. And I'll quote Amits from the interview. It's an invitation to transform, to remake ourselves, to leap forward in our creative process. Now, I'm very interested in what you think after the interview, but I really would prefer it if you watched the demo or even better, gave the Sudowrite beta a try, because I feel like so many of the opinions about AI are built on what authors imagine it can do in some dystopian sense, not what it can do right now and how authors are actually using it right now. And when you use something, it changes your mind as to what's possible. Think about all the tools that help you in your writing life. I mean, I said to Jonathan when the first iPhones came out, I was like, I'll never get a smartphone. I love my Nokia. You remember those little Nokias with just basically text and phone, that's all you could do. And now I can pretty much run my business from my iPhone. But in terms of just, specifically my writing process, using Scrivener as a tool changed my process. Using ProWriting Aid changed my process. Vellum for formatting. Doing dictation and using Descript now is really a big deal for me. And for podcasting, Descript is incredible. It's changed so many things. So I feel like there are lots of tools that we use in our writing process, and to me this is another one of them. So please leave a comment on this episode or tweet me at The Creative Penn or email me Joanna at The Creative Penn. Let me know what you think, and if you're already using Sudowrite or other AI tools, how are you using them in your creative process? So today's show is sponsored by my wonderful patrons who fund my brain and the time to think and record these types of extra in-between-episodes. And I did the Patreon-only Q&A this week. I did an extra 45 minutes of Q&A, questions asked by patrons on writing and craft and publishing and business and marketing and all that mindset and all the things. So if you would like to support the show with just a couple of dollars a month, or euros or pounds or Canadian dollars, you can support the show and you'll get the extra audio at patreon.com, patreon.com/The Creative Penn. Right, let's get into the interview. Amit Gupta is a science fiction writer and entrepreneur. He's the creator of Sudowrite, an AI creative writing tool. Welcome, Amit.
Thanks, Joanna. Glad to be here.
Oh, I'm so excited to talk to you. Before we get into the more technical stuff, tell us a bit more about you and your background in writing and technology and how it led you to creating Sudowrite.
Sure. So I've been involved in technology most of my life. Years ago, I started a company called Photo Jojo that was all about helping photographers be more creative and be more have more kind of playful fun with their work. And I sold that company several years ago, and at that point decided to make more time for writing science fiction because it was something I'd always been interested in. In particular, I'm really keen to explore ways technology can improve our lives to push back against the dystopia that's become so common in science fiction these days. So when I was starting, that is when I met my co-founder, James. He had also been in tech, and we'd both independently left that world behind and both ended up writing science fiction, which was kind of fun to find someone else who's like on the same journey. So we ended up forming like a writing group with a few friends. We were all getting started around the same time, kind of dealing with the same issues like imposter syndrome and, how do we do this? How do we learn how to do this from the ground up? And slowly but surely, we started getting better, started getting published in different places and nominated for awards and all this stuff. And then last year, when the pandemic hit, like so many people, we were looking for ways to both connect with others and also kind of to write our ways out of the confusing mess the world was in. And so it was around that time that a few of us started hosting this thing called Short Story Club, where we brought these prominent authors together to raise thousands for social causes, COVID-19 PPE, stuff like that, which is all to say, like, I think we're all looking for ways to contribute to the writing community and eager to play with new ways of doing things. And when we came upon the idea of using AI in writing last year, it just felt like it could fit both of those things. And yeah, our early experiments were really promising. We started sharing what we were working on with some of the writers we respect in the field. And it became clear really quickly that there was something exciting here that could really benefit writers. So James and I started working on what became Sudowrite back in August of last year, 2020.
I've been trying it out in the beta and I love it. I'm also in the beta of the just standard GPT-3, and listeners know I've explained GPT-3 before, so we don't need to go into that technical side. But what was it, I guess, what did you see at this point that was different to before? Because obviously you've been in the writing space, the technology space. Was it that GPT-3 and the stuff that OpenAI is doing, was that the catalyst to it will work this time?
Yeah, I think GPT-3 is definitely the catalyst. I think it showed us that the technology had gotten to a point where it could really do something for writing that I think many of us had started to assume was true in all these other creative fields. Like you can't really be a photographer today without using digital editing tools. You can't be someone who makes video or someone who makes music without a vast array of tools to help you make the sound and the video that you are creating to execute on your vision. But as writers, we've really had kind of pen and paper, we'd have typewriters, we had word processors, but there was a very steady migration from one to the other, and the tools are basically the same thing. So I think with GPT-3, we saw that there was a potential for something that really leapfrogged what was possible for writers.
Definitely, and I totally agree with you. So let's get into the tool and talk a bit about it. And very importantly, up front, I want to say, because I feel like people have, as you mentioned, the dystopia, people have in their mind, oh, well, you just press a button and it will spit out a novel and it will replace all writers.
Yeah.
It really isn't like that. So let's explore some of the features so we can help people understand what's there. So I've been playing a lot with the character generator, the describe function and the expand function. So I wondered if you would maybe talk a bit about those functions.
Sure. So the character generator is something we built for when you're getting started with a new piece of work. And perhaps you've got an idea for one or two of the people who might inhabit this world. Maybe you know how the world works, but you don't know who else is going to be in it, how the interrelationships work, and kind of what happens. So this is mainly a tool to help you brainstorm and to help you flesh out the world. You put in a few characters in your world. You maybe describe their age or their physical appearance, or their occupation, whatever else is relevant to those characters. And then Sudowrite will take those and spit out almost an infinite array of other characters who could also inhabit that world and also suggest interrelationships between the characters. I often, will take bits and pieces from different suggestions and amalgamate something into a character I like, but the idea is really just to get your mind spinning and get you moving. And that's true for a lot of what we've built with Sudowrite. We see it as something like having a writer sitting next to you who you can spitball ideas with and kind of get something good when you're stuck. So let's see. I think you mentioned the twists tool. The twist tool is pretty similar. Were you going to say something?
Oh, I was going to say, yeah, on the character, I must say, because I've been having real fun, and I want to keep emphasizing the word fun because I have been having fun with this. I just was like, oh, I'm going to add this to my character. Like you said, taking bits and bobs. So I started with 3 characters, and then as it generated more, I would add those things back into the original 3 and kind of keep generating things. And I came up, we'll come back to that, but together we came up with just some really cool things that I would not have thought of. And I must say that for me, I'm strong in setting, I'm strong in plot, but for me, this diversity of characters, I love this help. So I wanted to say I think that's brilliant. But yeah, so you mentioned twist. Let's do that next.
Oh, sure. So twists is, again, kind of similar to something that you might use at the beginning of the writing process, but also potentially if you're stuck in the middle and you feel like the work needs some kind of a twist or new life. You write, you write a short description of the story that you have going, maybe a paragraph or so, and you hit twists and you can choose the genre. We have a few options right now, but we might add more in the future. And twists will basically look at that and try to come up with ways to send the story in a direction that you don't expect. This one's a little off the wall. Sometimes it'll do something really interesting. Sometimes it'll suggest something that makes no sense at all. That's something you'll discover as you start using AI tools in general for writing. They're trying to understand what you've written as best as they can, but sometimes they're going to miss what you're going for. But yeah, twists will come up with some pretty interesting diversions to where you've taken the plot. And again, it's like having somebody next to you who's got a whole different set of experiences, a different life trajectory, who's potentially got something new to offer, and something that it brings back will often spark a direction that you end up taking.
And then I want to talk about the describe function. There's this brilliant thing where it covers smell. So explain the describe, because I'm just loving this.
Yeah, so describe is one of our most used features, and I love it because I often struggle with finding a way to describe very evocatively something that's, person, place, thing, whatever. So basically you highlight a word or a phrase, you hit describe, and Sudowrite will look at the text surrounding the phrase or the word that you've selected, and it'll suggest ways you could describe that word. And like you noted, it'll categorize its suggestions by the 5 senses: sight, sound, smell, etc., and even take a few attempts in giving a more metaphorical, poetic description.
Yeah, I love that. And I think of it more like an expanded thesaurus. So I use a thesaurus a lot in my editing past, really. It's sort of, okay, I've really overused that word, or I need a better word. So I often use a thesaurus. But to me, this describe function, exactly as you say, like, as I said, I'm terrible at smells. Like I just don't notice smells. But in order to bring our writing alive, it's not just sight all the time. And I love that. It has all these different things. And I guess to be clear to people, it doesn't just populate it in the text, does it? Explain how they have a choice.
Yeah, so whenever you use any of these functions in Sudowrite, it'll show some suggestions on the right of the document. So you can look at those, you can run it a few times if you don't like what it's come back with. And then typically people will copy and paste a piece of it, or just type out something that they're inspired by what Sudowrite has suggested. So when I, select something like the word prism in something I'm writing, it's not going to just describe the prism and put it in my text. It'll say a bunch of stuff along those 5 senses on the right side, and something will inspire you that you might end up using.
I was doing something earlier. I wanted some descriptions around eye drops, because it's just fun to try different things. I was like, eye drops, seriously, how do you describe eye drops? And just to see what it came, it was just fantastic stuff I just never would have thought of. I think that's, as you say, it's like a different mind. Again, we don't have enough language for this, but it's like, as you say, sitting next to someone else who's got a different mind than you, and then sort of picking and mixing from their brain.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you mentioned a thesaurus, and I think one of the interesting things about the describe feature is it is very similar to a thesaurus, but it has more context because it has the work around the word or phrase that you've selected, so it can try to narrow in on what the word is that you're really looking for.
And then the other thing that's interesting is the expand function, which I can see is great for outliners, but also I'm not an outliner, I'm a discovery writer, but I'm finding that I am almost outlining in order to see what it will expand. So explain that one.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So expand is for people who, and by the way, I say this tool is for people who this, or this tool is for people who that. But of course, people use these in all sorts of different ways that we didn't imagine. But initially, we thought expand was for people who perhaps struggled with that first draft, just getting something out that could be terrible, could be rough around the edges, but once it's sketched out, it's easier to edit and to make better. And that's definitely me. I love editing, I love revising, but I feel a lot of inertia when I start. So with expand, you can summarize your scene, characters, plot, setting, whose point of view it should be, whatever is important. And Sudowrite will attempt to write a very, very rough first draft of it. You may not love it. It may go in a completely different direction than what you imagined. And even if you love it, you'll need to revise it, but it'll help you get started and kind of get rolling.
Yeah, that is helping me change my thinking around mini outlining, and I'm just working on a short story at the moment. That's what I'm testing it on. But for people listening, I want them to get the sense that there are lots of different tools within Sudowrite, so it's not just one thing. But I guess one of the things that is what the main GPT-3 is, which is this text generation. So you've called it the wormhole. So yeah. Explain why you called it the wormhole and what that actually does.
Yeah, well, the reason we called it the wormhole is because we're obviously science fiction writers, and we like to think of it like we're going into the multiverse and asking 5 parallel versions of ourselves to write what comes after what we've written so far. So how it works, basically, you've started something, you're writing something, you're in the middle of it, and you get stuck. And we want to help you get unstuck. So when you hit Wormhole will look at everything that you've written so far, or as much of it as it can manage to look at, and it'll try to understand the voice of the piece, the characters in it, the plot arc, the character arcs, whatever it can discern. And then it'll try to continue from where you've left off. And it'll only do a few paragraphs or so from where you left off, and it'll give you 5 different options for where you could go with it next. But people have been pretty surprised by how interesting and useful the responses can be, and how closely they can mimic both like the voice and the structure of what you're writing.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it is not just press a button and out comes a thriller at all. It's like you put in 500 words, or how many words do you have to put in for the wormhole?
I think at least 100, but the more the better.
Yeah, so you put in a couple of 100 words and then you can press the wormhole and it will continue your writing using your voice. But again, as you say, it's like first draft, it needs work. It might not be anything at all based on what you want. Yeah. I also love, because I'm a bit of a darker writer, you have a mood, don't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, we have a few different tones you can choose, whether it's more ominous or extraordinary or whimsical, with varying results. It can be a fun way to kind of mix up what you're doing.
Yes, I've been using the ominous, the ominous tone, which again is really fun. So I also think, and this, because I've been playing with GPT-3 for a few months, and I found it very difficult. Obviously, what you've done is built a tool on top of the engine, so you've got like a front end with all these different ways of using it, which is why I think this is so fantastic. But one of the interesting things is the quality of the input prompt makes a huge difference to the output. And I felt like I had to really change my brain to understand this. So what are your tips for the best prompts or inputs to get the best out of Sudowrite?
Yeah, well, definitely, like you said, garbage in, garbage out. And if you put in something beautiful, Sudowrite will try its best. I think figuring out how to use tools like this is going to become part of the creative undertaking. No 2 people are going to use it the same way. And we're so early in figuring out how to use tools like this. And so I think the best way to learn and the best way to figure out how to use it is just to tinker. There's no wrong way to do it. And the people who take time to play with this technology as it evolves are going to figure out the best ways to use it. To give you just one example, we were talking about the character generator, which is obviously there to help you create new characters in your work. But we have writers in our beta who've also used it by giving it lists of imaginary places and descriptions of those places. And then the character generator will come up, will create new places in the world. And they've used it for like magical spells, where they where they give Sudowrite a few examples of spells, what goes into those spells, how they're made, who they affect, how long they affect those people. And then Sudowrite will go and invent a whole mess of additional magical spells that they can potentially choose from. Your imagination is the limit. And I think that's kind of the challenge here. You need to imagine it for Sudowrite to help you with it.
Yeah, exactly. And I was just thinking there, that's kind of, here are 3 things, now give me a 4th and a 5th and a 6th thing that are similar to the first 3 things. That's really what you're talking about. So I love that people are using it for different things other than characters, which is fantastic. And I think what I started with, and probably many people will, is sort of copying and pasting our own writing from published work, for example, into Sudowrite, and then using it to play with instead of starting from scratch. That's how I've been playing with it, I guess.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's a good way to play with it. And I think one of the other ways, this is a little bit harder to figure out when you're getting started, but one of the other ways to play with it is to, again, think of it as somebody who's sitting next to you and you're brainstorming with. So a few months ago, I was working on a short story and I had actually finished it and I had sent it out to some friends for critique. And one of the pieces of feedback I got was that the main character felt a little flat. And so I tried to figure out how I could fill out this character using Sudowrite. And so I tried to give Sudowrite the amount of background I might give to a friend who hadn't read the story. So I gave them a little summary of the plot, who the characters are. And then I said, here are the characteristics that make this person unique according to her. Like, she was an Indian American, so her Indian American heritage. And I hit Wormhole after that. So story description, and then just kind of like an outline format of the character traits I saw in this person. And Wormhole then filled in those character traits and gave me a selection of a few dozen things that I could potentially use. And then from that list, I actually ended up choosing a couple things that I thought did make sense for the plot, did make sense for that character, and which I hadn't actually thought of myself. Despite being Indian American, they hadn't occurred to me.
Yeah, exactly. Haven't occurred to us because our brains have been trained, in inverted commas, with our experience and the books we've read. And what we've got here is this powerful engine, which has got a lot more training, I guess, from all of these works. And so you are accessing something that will never be exactly like you, which is the kind of magical thing. But I also, I know people listening, like, there are obviously... well, let's talk about copyright. Okay, so first of all, with copyright, I mean, you mentioned there a short story. What are the copyright ramifications with using text that Sudowrite creates?
Sure. So it's a good question. We, as a company, don't claim any copyright over anything that Sudowrite generates. So if you're using it as a writer, anything that comes out of it is yours to use. That said, we strongly recommend everyone treat it as a rough first draft and use it as inspiration, not for a final material. And I think that's how you're going to get the best work out of it. But that's also just like for your own peace of mind. That said, we have looked at, on many occasions, we've taken particularly delightful lines or passages the Sudowrite suggested, run them through plagiarism detection software, search for them online, and we haven't found any matches. And just by virtue of the way the software works right now, it's non-deterministic. Every time you run it, it comes up with something new. It's very unlikely that you'll end up getting someone else's work. And we've never seen it happen, but who knows what could happen. So we always want people to treat this with caution. And the final version of the product will probably have some sort of plagiarism detection in the app just in case.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I guess another question would be, what response is there from publishers, if any? As in, I know there was something was it the New York Times or somewhere, and a short story
New Yorker,
written,
yeah.
The New Yorker, right? So they knew that Sudowrite was involved, I guess.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Are there any problems there, you see?
We haven't come across any. That's not to say that there couldn't be in the future, but we have had authors start to submit work, and we don't have a general guideline about whether or not we should say that it was something they wrote in Sudowrite. Of course, we're thrilled if they do, and some of them have said that. So I think we had one of our writers publish a poem in Strange Horizons, which is a speculative fiction magazine, yesterday, which was really cool to see. And the author of that New Yorker piece, as you mentioned, had also published some fiction. So we're hoping we'll see more and more fiction in collaboration with Sudowrite start to come out. But yeah, we haven't heard of any publications specifically saying they're in support of it or not in support of it. I think eventually stuff like this, because it's something that helps inspire the work and develop the work, not so much create the work, it'll start to feel like a spell check or a grammar check. And I think it wouldn't feel right if I wrote something and said, oh, this was spell checked by Microsoft Word or something. It just doesn't matter. And I think we'll probably get to the same point with software like this.
Yeah, I'd agree with you at the moment. But as you said, we're very early in this. And right now, definitely playing with Sudowrite, as you said, there are some terms of phrase and some interesting ideas, but it's going to turn into my work. If I gave you the stuff I had taken from it, you would write a different story, even though the sort of input was the same. I guess we don't know where it will go. But then coming back to photography, because of course that was your first business. With photography, you still need a raw photo that you then manipulate in software, right? So I feel like with AI writing, we will always direct the creative experience.
Yeah, I think that's right. And similar to photography, given a landscape, given a subject, everyone's going to interpret it in a different way. Even though you imagine photography is just taking this device and pressing the shutter, there's so much more to it. And I think the photographer's task is really to execute on their creative vision with the tools they have available. And no two photographers are going to take the same picture. And the same is true here. I think that the writer's job is to identify the thing that's worth writing about, to bring their humanity to it, to bring the emotional pathos and the feeling to it. And that's not something that a device can do, but hopefully it's something that that can help them with it and maybe take some of the harder drudgery work out of it.
Yeah, and I guess just coming to some of the other issues, some people, I mean, I've had emails from people saying it's unethical to use AI writing tools, or it's cheating somehow, or it will result in a tsunami of crap generated books on Kindle Unlimited. So I'm sure you've heard all these objections. What are your thoughts on those?
Sure. I want to respond with a parable, but I'll also try to respond to each of the questions. There's this parable of the wise man and the village. So one day a young woman goes to the wise man because the village river is flooding its banks for days longer than it has ever before. And she's worried. And she asks the wise man what they should do. And the wise man says not to worry. The river always floods its banks this time of year, and it will, he says, eventually recede. So the young woman goes away, still worried. She learns how to build a small boat, just a floating platform, really. And she starts to use it to float supplies from one end of the village to the other. A few days later, the waters recede. But a year later, the rivers flood again. And this time, water enters the village. At one point, it's rising several inches above the ground. And the young woman goes again to the wise man and asks him what to do. And this time the wise man invites her into his hut, and he shows her how he's made a hole in the ground, a hole in the wall, and he's dug this trench. So the water flows through his home now. And he takes a spear and he thrusts the spear into the stream running through his home and lifts the tip before her eyes. And there's a fish flapping at the end of this spear. This flood is a blessing, he says. So the young woman leaves and she decides to build a sailboat. She sails away. And one day, many, many years later, she returns. And this time she's on a much larger boat with many more people. She finds her village submerged in deep water, and the wise man sunning himself on his rooftop. The waters, they've risen so far, he can't stay inside anymore, so he sleeps on the roof, fishes on his roof, spends his days in the sun on his roof. But all these years later, he's thrilled when he sees her because, he likes her. It's been a long time. He asks her where she's been, and she invites him aboard the boat. So he climbs up onto her ship, and She tells him of the distant lands she's seen on her boat, the strange and wondrous people she's met, and the stories of their village that she's brought to these people and those lands. And the wise man is pleased, and he joins her on the voyage. What does all this mean? Well, we all know change is inevitable. Everything's always changing. We're always changing. And we're incredibly adept at adapting to change. It's just something humans are good at. We can take the new and we can form it around ourselves. We can overcome the obstacle and even derive some small benefit from it. And so many of our stories are about this too. They're about obstacles and how we adapt to it, how we changed around it and become better people as a result of it. But if the change is big enough, I think it's really an invitation to transform, to remake ourselves, to leap forward. And I think writers have that opportunity today.
That was great. I love that story. And yeah, it reminds, and I've quoted Kevin Kelly many times on this show, but he says you'll be paid in the future based on how well you work with robots. And of course, robots, AI, technology, I guess. And like you said, it's a leap forward. I love that. And also, you're right, we haven't had enough technological change really helping us with the creative process. And I feel like the music industry and film and photography and all these other areas are way ahead of us. So it's fantastic that we're finally getting something.
I know, it's so exciting. I feel like the future is so bright for writing.
Oh, I'm so glad you feel that, because I do too. And I guess that we are techno-optimists, aren't we? Mm-hmm. It is tough. Okay, so I do have a couple of other things. So obviously you're excited. You mentioned, for example, I think the what ifs or the twists are only certain genres. So what are you looking at developing next within Sudowrite? And I guess when will it be out of beta?
Yes, the eternal question. Well, there's all sorts of features we're looking at, and I think we draw a lot of inspiration from the community as well. I think outlining is something that people have asked us for, so it's something you can do today using Wormhole, but it's something we'll probably build upon in the future. And as you noted, genre support in different tools is probably something we'll add as well. But we're really trying to play it by ear and just watch what people do with it, see where they run into trouble with their work, and how Sudowrite can help.
So really just seeing how it goes. And one of the things I'm really interested in, so obviously we assume, obviously we don't know, but GPT-3 is trained on, I guess, publicly available words. It's not meant to have works in copyright, although who knows. But what would be interesting, I think, is to fine tune a model with works in copyright. So, for example, I write action adventure, and a number of other indie action adventure authors would be interested in putting all our novels into a corpus, for example, and using it to fine tune some kind of version. Now, I know that some authors have done this with GPT-2 and the new Eleuther AI, GPT Neo, I think it is called. But what do you think about this idea of fine tuning the model for Sudowrite?
Yeah, I think it's super interesting. And when we were getting started, I remember we showed this to Ken Liu and Robin Sloan, and they had both experimented with using, I think Ken was using GPT-2. I don't remember what Robin was using, but they both experimented with taking their own work and, as you said, training the model to help them tell their stories in their own voice more quickly. I think it's super, super interesting. And we've been talking a little bit about photography. My first thought is that it's like those kind of filter packs that photographers will sometimes sell to help others achieve similar effects to their own work. There's a lot of potential not only to like create your own work more quickly, but to help other people get off the ground, get started more quickly with developing work similar to yours. Unfortunately, today, that's not something Sudowrite can do, and the tech we're building on right now doesn't allow us to fine-tune our model, but I think it's super interesting for development in the future, and I'm hopeful that not only for writers individually, but maybe even for teams of writers working within like a shared universe, that could be a useful tool that's aware of everything that's been written in the world and is able to help you write in a way that's consistent. Or you could even imagine like writing rooms for TV shows, wanting something similar for writing episodes that are, again, consistent within the world of the show, and take some of the work off the research required to make sure things are kept consistent.
Absolutely. And what about coming out of beta? And if people are interested in joining, how's that going?
Yeah, so we're slowly letting people in. We just want to be careful. It's, as you've seen, it's pretty rough around the edges at this point, and we want to make sure the product is useful. So when people arrive, that it's something they know that they can actually benefit from. But we're letting new people on every day. If anyone wants to sign up, they can go to Sudowrite.com, which is Sudowrite.com, and sign up. And we'll ask a few questions when they do that. And if they mention that Joanna sent them to us, we'll try to bump them to the front of the list.
Thank you so much. So just one final question. Obviously, AI and technology is much bigger than just writing. And I always remind people of that. It's like, yeah, there's a lot more going on. It's not just AI and writing. But what are the other things you're excited about in terms of how authors and other creators can use AI and other technologies? Like, what do you see coming over the horizon? I mean, we might have GPT-4 soon, and who knows what GPT-10 will be doing, or any other things you're excited about?
Yeah, for sure. So GPT-3 is definitely like very text focused. And I think the future of GPT-3 is largely text, but the company that's developing these models, OpenAI, also experimented with image and sound models. So I think it's going to be really interesting in years to come as these models both get better and you're able to integrate them with each other. So you could imagine trying to develop music for the first time as somebody who's never made music, or someone who's never made a movie, trying to author a story that's then, at least in rough form, created through multiple AI models, both the video and the sound, and help with the writing. So I feel like there's just so much potential to help people tell the stories they've always wanted to tell, the stories they need to tell, using tools that bring this to any person's desk.
Yeah, I think that multimodal idea, the sort of like your describe function is highlight a word and it will generate some more words. But if you could highlight a section and it would generate music to go with your section, or generate video or other modalities, I guess. I think, as you say there are really interesting ideas in that way. And we are so early. When do you think this might be more mainstream? You know, at the moment, we've got tools like Grammarly and Pro Writing Aid, which a lot of authors now use, and Scrivener, for example, that a lot of authors use and have been around for like a decade, really. When do you think this type of tool will become more mainstream?
I think it's going to happen in bits and spurts, and we really won't almost notice as it happens. Like even today, you can go onto the App Store and you can download apps that will help you create music from your voice and from your creativity in ways that we couldn't at all 5 years ago, or even a couple of years ago. So I think these little pieces will develop independently. As for when they're all tied together and I can just imagine a full feature film and have it spring to reality through a single tool, I don't know. It's sort of like self-driving, where we always think it's right around the corner, but it's just not here yet. It's hard to predict.
Yeah, and it's funny because you think you're expecting X and Y turns up.
Exactly. Yeah, you never know which direction it'll actually go. That's true.
Exactly. Like, for example, I was interested in blockchain last year, but NFTs just suddenly just appeared almost out of nowhere. But then you find out that some musicians and artists have been using NFTs for years. It just suddenly became more mainstream. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. Well, brilliant. That was so interesting, Amit. So just tell people one more time where they can find Sudowrite.
Sure. It's the website Sudowrite.com, Sudowrite.com.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Joanna. This was a lot of fun.
So I hope you found the interview with Amit useful, and that it has given you some things to think about in terms of AI writing tools and what might come in the future. Ideally, as I said, please watch the demo video or give the beta a go, because the practical use of the tool might change your mind as to whether you might use it or other things as they emerge. Please leave a comment on the episode, or tweet me at The Creative Penn, or email me joanna@thecreativepenn.com and let me know what you think, or if you're already using AI in your creative process. So back to the usual show on Monday, when I'm talking about writing humour with Scott Dickers, co-founder of The Onion and author of books like How to Write Funny and How to Write Funny Characters. And this is definitely one of the topics I struggle with. And Scott is it's a wonderful interview. I really enjoyed it. So I know you'll enjoy it, even if you don't intend to write humour. As I said, I don't write humour, but we all need some levity in our writing. So happy writing. And I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you found it helpful. You might also like the backlist episodes and show notes, available at thecreativepenn.com/podcast. You can also get your free author blueprint at thecreativepenn.com/blueprint. If you'd like to connect, you can tweet me at The Creative Penn or find me on Facebook at The Creative Penn. See you next time.